maybe I'll be Brian's fit dummy for a minute.
Yeah.
We were going to do this next door, but it's too dark in the fit room. But if I was a cyclist on a bike with a given crank length, your foot will come up to a certain point. You get a certain hip angle. And for most people, you need an angle that's not more acute than a certain amount to get that back open and make you efficient. So long story short, over the last 10 years, especially in triathlon and pro cycling, the trend has been shorter crank lengths. And rather than getting that knee up there, you drop the knee by a few millimeters. And essentially we can lower your front end by that same amount and make you faster without losing any efficiency. And that kind of goes back to data, which is that crank arm has shown to largely not, crank arm length has shown largely not to correlate with power. So the notion that tall people need super long crank arms has largely been debunked, with exception of a couple weird fit schools out there. So that's another way, generally the trend towards shorter cranks to get you in a more aerodynamic position. So that doesn't mean I'd say run out and buy shorter cranks tomorrow, but you know, if you're an average height person on long cranks or a short person on medium cranks, your next bike, go down a crank length or two, and you're going to be able to kind of drop that front end and get more a reduction in your frontal area. Related to that is bar width. And I mean, I'll say Brian's probably done a lot more fits than I have. I'm the amateur fitter here. But like 15, 20 years ago, when I was first riding as a, teenager, 20 something, really wide bars were the norm. 42 centimeter bars seemed narrow, 44s, 46s were pretty common. And now we've seen the trend run towards narrower bars in a major way. And maybe Brian can, it relates to frontal area.
Yeah.
But Brian can kind of talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. And it's, again, one of those same things. If you're getting a bike from like a stock build, generally they're looking at a bell curve of what bars would work for most people in that certain size. So you'll generally see a wider bar built into like some bikes that might not necessarily translate best to your fit. So what we do is we measure your shoulders to bring that frontal area closer to where your shoulders are and kind of line everything up, just closing that little circle even more. And you'll see like bars like these, and even have very small reaches, which helps, again, get you a little lower, a little more comfortable. And again, just free kind of speed and aerodynamics right there.
So bottom line is we're really looking to reduce that frontal area and keep you comfortable. And I think it's not just one of those things where we say, oh, get refit every 2 years. There's some truth to that. Your body does change. But I think the bigger thing is just looking at where the industry has gone and where fitting trends have gone. And overall, the position, the most efficient position has trended towards a little further forward on the saddle, a little lower in the front end. And, those very small changes in aerodynamics can really result in pretty big gains in wattage, where we'll get to the tech side and the equipment, but people will often spend thousands of dollars on wheels that might gain you 1, 2, 3 watts of speed, whereas dropping your front end by a centimeter is going to do more than that and pretty much cost you, the price of a bike fit. So, and it must also be said that, I'm not a racer. We're very concerned with comfort on the bike. We think if you're comfortable, you're going to be fast. So we're always focused on, maximizing your aerodynamics within the envelope of keeping you comfortable.
Yeah.
And these tricks, the shorter cranks, the better saddle fit, narrower bars, all get us towards that without compromising comfort on the bike. So, so that's kind of the long and short of the bike fit side. Maybe I'll quickly pause there and maybe open it up if anyone wants to unmute and ask any fit related questions or just go down any related road. Nobody?
I think someone might be asking.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
I see a hand raised, so go for it.
Mike, you're on mute.
Yeah, I see. Hi guys, thanks for presenting, and everybody. It's nice to see friendly faces up there. That the saddles, you got, that was a pro something. The one that comes to mind is that the Specialized Power that seemed to come out 2-3 years ago. Is that like, and I noticed that Pro has a very significant cutout in it.
Mm-hmm.
So that seems to be like not what my older saddles have had. So what is it? Is it the snub nose? Is it the cutout? Is it a combination?
It's a combination of all that. The biggest thing on saddles that, and once I say it, you're gonna look at all the saddles differently, is that they have two distinct kind of like shapes here. You can see them. Ones have more of a Y shape and ones have more of a T shape. Generally, these older saddles have these Y shapes, and it doesn't allow for a lot of that pelvic rotation. And so all these snub nose saddles, really starting with the Power saddle, which was based off of a tri saddle called the Cetero that Specialized has. It was all to like rotate the hip forward and like get you like more of a pelvic tilt to get you more on top of the bar while not sacrificing your comfort. The T shape allows for clearance for the thighs. So you'll see that you can, again, continue to rotate forward, not having any pressure in the front of the pelvic bone. The cutouts are also like kind of something we see a lot more of. A lot of people don't really need a cutout. It's been something that's been pushed that is important to have, but there's some saddles we have that have a channel similar to this one. I'm not sure if you guys can see that. Has a channel through it, which has the same effect and keeps the body of the saddle strong. So don't get too hung up on like the cutout if you see it. And if someone says that you have to have a cutout, it doesn't necessarily mean you do. It's really making sure that you can be supported by your seat bones and have that rotation in the pelvic bone. That's the most important thing. And so you should get fitted for a saddle. And if you do, there's a few things you should look for, not just the width and protrusion of your seat bones, but how your hip rotates as well.
I think to just finish up, everything Brian said, I think is on the mark. To answer your question, it is a combination. I think the idea is, the thought is that in an older style saddle, nobody sits on this front area. It's too narrow and too firm. So essentially the idea was to increase the width to give a wider area to disperse pressure. And then, the cutout, I would say Brian's right. It's some people can benefit from it. It definitely does relieve numbness if you have perennial pressure or soft tissue issues. But like Brian was saying, just as importantly, it's just to allow a little more pelvic rotation and avoid the kind of rolled back look that, if we can get you with a flatter back, more over the pedals, you're going to put a lot more power through your glutes and your hip flexors. And this comes from someone who's ridden rolled back for 25 years. But some of these newer saddles, the Specialized, the new Physiques, the SQ Labs, really allow for that little bit of additional rotation without feeling like you're pushing against something. So it's a pretty big change. As someone who, all the classics, the Concord and the Sella Italia Flight, I rode them all. And now I look back and, I'm like, I can't imagine not riding one of these now. So it is a pretty big game changer. Any other questions on the fit side?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Like those saddles, does it play the same rule against all the different aspects like cross, road, mountain bike? It applies to all of them, the benefits?
I've seen the trends go that way. Like I know a lot of mountain bikers who wouldn't even say a fit is that important. And now fit is almost everything. And saddles have kind of gone through gravel, through road, and into mountain bike. And you're seeing more of these like snub nose across all disciplines. Yeah.
I would say, Brody, Brian's answer is right. You're seeing like gravel saddles of this style. They'll usually be a little more padded. Some will actually even cover the cutout so you don't get kind of like dirt and spray through the saddle. But they are trending. I think generally the more upright the position on the bike, the less these cutout saddles are necessary. So, for mountain bikers where they do tend to sit with a taller back angle, that perennial pressure is just less evident. So it's less about aerodynamics with mountain bikes because the speeds are slower, and more about being upright and having control in technical terrain. So road, you're more focused on that aggressive position. Gravel, I'd say you're kind of in the middle, where you want to balance the aerodynamics with maybe all day comfort. But I would say, I'll tell you anecdotally, we do hundreds of fits a year, and we have a lot of people who are on old saddles who want to try something new. And I would say somewhere in the 70 to 80% range, people are preferring these new style saddles to the traditional ones, to the point where I can tell you my ordering trends have changed, where I'm ordering like 90% of these new styles, and not because we have any ulterior motive other than that's what people seem most comfortable on.
Comfort, definitely.
That's what it comes down to. Okay, well, I'll say thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
I guess I'm the
Thanks,
MC
everyone.
for tonight. And we're gonna have Matt come in here. Matt has been with us for 3 years, right?
Just about 3.
Matt's got a degree in engineering from U of T, so he's vastly overqualified, and therefore is really focused on the tech and design and engineering side of what we do. So maybe first I'll let Matt just introduce himself, and then I'll pop open his slide and kind of you can check out the bullet points, and then he'll dive into it.
Hey, yeah, I'm Matt. I do a lot of the technical advice here, still doing some service. I poured many of you coffees as well. So I do a couple things here. I'll be going over, following up a little bit on the fit aspect that Brian touched on, because really fit's number one. If you're fit on your bike, if you can keep your hands on the hoods or keep your hands in the drops, that's your fastest position. But moving on from that to components, because it's a lot easier to buy nice wheels than it is to work on your core strength. That's I'm sure what everyone's wondering. So I'll get into it.
So I'll just share the screen for a moment, guys, and you can check out what Matt will be talking about.
All right.
Gotta go down a screen, sorry. There we go.
There we go. Okay. So in the last 5-10 years in bike kind of design and specs, the focus has been more on aero than ever because we have a better understanding of it than ever. Now, what matters in aero and what makes us fast? So I'll start actually with what we're calling overrated, because they're easy to gloss through and it's going to be quick. Aero frames, internal cables, ceramic bearings, and really, really deep aero wheels. They look really cool on Instagram. They're really expensive. And certain things like internal cabling, they make the bikes a lot harder to work on. They do not go too in depth. They make them heavier. They lose terms in ride quality, and they become more proprietary. Ceramics, I'm not claiming to know more than someone like Ceramic Speed. Ceramic Speed, obviously they're much more, and they know more about this than I do. These oversized pulley wheels, for example, kind of the beating heart of their company.
They spin forever.
They spin forever. If you do your own reading, there are factual downsides to everything because nothing is the best. So you just got to decide whether the free speed is worth it or the downsides that they're not going to tell you about, that you have to go to your local bike shop to get the opinion on, whether that's going to be enough of a downside to not do it.
And I'll jump in and just say, like, I kind of agree with Matt. Aero frame design has been a big trend. I think it's the actual gains in speed are probably overstated. I think I saw Felt's new aero bike. They said over 40 kilometers, it was like 2 seconds faster. I think I laughed for an hour when I saw that. You could argue ceramic bearings they're all small marginal gains, but if you got ceramic bearings in your hubs and in your bottom bracket and in your pulley wheels, you probably are netting out, between 10 and 15 watts total, but you're going to spend a fair amount of money to get there. And so we love upgrades, but we're honest about it too. And, usually we say, well, ceramics are kind of the last thing you should put on your bike, not a necessity.
So now flipping through the things that are worthwhile, and leaving wheels for last, because they're really the most important part. Focusing on another aspect of fit for a moment is, again, narrower bars, lower stack, and an aero bar. Switching from a round top bar to an aero top bar is huge in terms of aero gains, because it's all about where the air hits the bike first, which is the front of the bike. So you want to do everything you can to minimize that frontal area, because it's what's meeting the wind first. So the easiest ways to do that are narrowing your bar width, which brings your shoulders in, brings in the whole thing, and then just lowering the bars, again, gets your head out of the wind. If you're really aggressive, your back's even on kind of that of an angle, and the wind's blowing right over you. That takes a lot of work.
I'll also just say, you know, when we measure people's shoulders for bike fits, and we've kind of discovered through trial and error and riding ourselves and getting feedback from customers, is that most people are on bars that are too wide for them. And most people are probably capable of going a lot narrower than they realize. So, you know, I'm 6'2". I rode like 44 centimeter bars forever till I finally, you know, realized my shoulders were narrow, went to 40s, and now I've gone to 38s on some bikes. And I've even ridden 36s, and those start getting a little on the tight side. But if I was paid to race, I'd go as narrow as possible. So
and that's the other thing, is there's no one, if you are someone with multiple road bikes, they don't all have to have the same parts. I've got a track bike with a 36. My fastest road bike is a 38, but then for comfort, I ride a 40. So it's really build the bike for how it's going to be ridden. If you're building this bike to be your race bike, the narrowest bars that lets you get up the next morning and not be in pain. But if you want a bike that's quick to keep up on a group ride that you still want to do a 200K ride on, maybe you don't want to go that whole way to the 38 bar, because it's going to hurt at the end of a long day.
And some of it is also trial and error. You know, it's a combination of shoulder width, kind of musculature, position on the bike. So, you know, a lot of the time when we do fitting sessions, we'll swap out bar widths and let you kind of ride for an extended period to sort of see how you feel. But definitely to kind of bring it back to fit, it's a huge factor. But I'm going to let Matt talk a little bit about wheels and tires, because the truth is tires are the biggest difference maker. I shouldn't say that. They're not an expensive upgrade, but rolling resistance and matching your tire width to your rim is huge. And I'll let Matt kind of take it from there.
So yeah, the most important component on your bike are your tires. That's what's connecting you, the rider, to the road. And so if you think about it, what does a tire need to do? It needs to be fast. It needs to grip so you don't wipe out when you're in a corner, and it hopefully prevents flats. I say hopefully because now how do we make a tire fast? Think about F1. You've got big tires that are really soft rubber and super, super pliable and hopefully light. Then the downside of that is you're not going to get any puncture protection because you've got these thin, light, flexible tires. So back to the point of what is the purpose of your bike, you've got to think, okay, I can read all these online reviews. I can buy the fastest tire that Bike Rumor says is the fastest tire, but Toronto roads suck. So if I'm doing Bayview repeats and I get 2 flats and a 50K ride, do I really want a top spec race tire? So you can be better off getting even you can get a nice high-end training tire. And then if you get a nice wheel and you match the profile there, you're not going to get flats. You're going to be pretty quick, and you have great aero. You have a great aero profile.
And I should also jump in and say, we're pretty geeky about tires, and there's a lot of data out there. BicycleRollingResistance.com has shed a lot of light on tire performance. And so it is pretty easy for us to get a good handle on speed, durability, that combination, and really give people proper advice, because there's a lot of fast rolling tires that are reasonably durable. There's actually, Matt's got the Envy tire, just as an example, came out a few months ago. And it's actually not the fastest on the market, and they were open about that, but it is very durable and has a relatively aerodynamic profile. So they really sold it as a nice all-rounder. But
so then moving on, actually, before we move on from tires, you've got, okay, so there's the compound the tire's made of. Now there's how do we get it on the rim? So you've got clincher, which everybody's changed to flat. Everybody knows what a clincher is. Recently, you've gotten, it's been around a mountain bike for a while, but you've got tubeless in a big way making its way into road. And then you've got tried and true tubulars. I'm probably the youngest one in this audience, but I still ride tubular. It is the fastest. It is the best, period. Moving down from, but tires are expensive. You've got to glue or tape them to the rims. There's lots of downsides. But if you want to know what the fastest tire is, it's what the pros are still on. It's tubular. We're not pros. So what do we really ride? We're doing a lot of tubeless because it is faster, and because of the sealant inside, you eliminate a lot of your puncture potential. The downside being, if you get a big tear, it's messy, it sucks. You may ruin a nice kit, but there's enough upsides that every bike for all the staff here, we're all riding tubeless.
And it's worth saying, since this is the free speed session, that tubeless is faster than running clinchers. The engineering term, is it hysteresis?
I can't say it.
I can't say it. But basically, it's the flex of the tube causing loss in wattage, and your lack of a tube in a tubeless setup overcomes that. It's worth saying for those traditionalists who want to just stick to clinchers, there are better tubes out there now. Latex tubes and these new kind of synthetic tubes by Tufolito and now Schwalbe are much faster riding than traditional butyl tubes. So again, it's one of those parts where like these synthetic tubes or a latex tube might be a $20 or $40 tube versus your usual $5 or $8 butyl tube. But again, you're getting weight savings and real wattage advantages for very little money. So tires and tubes are definitely important.
Mm-hmm. So now on to wheels, because everybody wants to talk about wheels with their bike. I've got 4 examples you can't quite all see, but I'll be pulling them out. But in terms of wheels, your options are not aero, meaning something like an aluminum wheel or something like a low profile climbing wheel, like a climbing carbon wheel, which is rare, but we still get them. So that would be your not aero or traditional, let's call it. Then you've got your old school or your traditional aero being your V shape, like your lightweights or something like that. Then you've got your newer generation, like your NVAR, your Zip 303, where it's this super, super wide rim with a bit of a U shape to it. And then you've got your, what I'm calling experimental, where you like brands like Zip or Princeton, they're coming out with these wheels that have all these kind of wacky shapes to them, that they're drawing on different inspiration from different areas in nature and all that. And whether there's any validity to it is up in the air at the moment, but there's lots of pro teams riding the wheels and doing very well on them. So again, who's to say if it's good or not? Not me. So those are the rims. Now your tires got to mate to the rim at some point. And one of the biggest things in road right now is what width tire do I run? So what the basic answer is the widest run your frame can fit, because a 30 mil tire on a modern U-shaped rim is just as aero as your old 25 mil on an old aero wheel from 15 years ago. The upside of it is it's much more comfortable because you got way more tire. The downside being you can't have these modern super wide profiles in rim brake, and also they don't fit most early gen, especially aero disc frames. So there is still a ton of value in these older V-shaped rims and just older aero wheels, because with a 28, they're faster than a newer gen wheel. and older frames just don't have the tire clearance. So examples of, starting with a bad example to get this near the camera. So this is an older sort of V profile to the rim. You can see there's kind of a sharp sort of ridge here, which the light's reflecting off. And looking at our rim and tire here, it's sort of a light bulb shape. There's not a good smooth transition from the tire to the rim. That meaning you're gonna get a lot of, that's where you get all your aero losses in that light bulb shape. Showing a good example. This is a modern, this is that NV, that modern U-shape profile. It's again, a little hard to see through this laptop camera, but you don't get the light reflecting off of the rim here because it's a much smoother curve. It's closer to a U than a V. And then looking at our profile, much smoother transition from our tire to our rim.
I would just jump in and maybe add a tiny bit of context to what Matt's saying, because I love tire data. I'm very nerdy. I've always been on the big tire train for a long time. Like I remember when I opened the shop and people were still buying 23 millimeter tires, and I was trying to convince them to buy 28s, and people thought I was crazy. The reality is, on our relatively rough Toronto roads, the slightly bigger, like 28 millimeter tire gives you a lot of comfort, some extra flat prevention, and almost no loss in speed with the right rim. I would qualify Matt's comments to say a 30 mil tire on rough roads is fast. On smooth roads at low winds, a 25 millimeter tire is still the fastest. But when that gets into real world is where that changes. And you're seeing, for example, the new Zip 303s, they designed around 28 millimeter tires because they basically said real world conditions, once you put in imperfections in the pavement, bumps, rocks, potholes, you're going to be faster on 28s because you're going to be more comfortable and you're going to put more power out consistently, as opposed to having to kind of pause every time you hit a bump. And I think our Ontario roads are probably more like Flanders roads than French and Swiss Alp roads. And if you look at the Tour of Flanders, Paris-Roubaix, even the pros who get paid to go very fast are running 28 and 30 millimeter tires. So I think that tells you a lot. I think the last thing I'll say, and then I'll let Matt keep going, is the key to all of this that most brands don't talk about and most people don't quite hold themselves to is your tire needs to be, it's the rule of 105. It's Josh Portner from Silka, who was Zip's former head engineer, basically shed light. Your tire should be 5% narrower than your rim, not wider. If they're about even, you're okay. As soon as your tire is wider than your rim, you're killing your aerodynamics. And if you have, a set of aluminum wheels and you're just cruising around, that's okay. But once you start spending $1,500 to $3,500 on carbon wheels, we really want to set you up in the best way possible. So my long story short is the trend towards wide rims enables the use of 28 and even 30 and even moving towards 32 millimeter tires with good aerodynamics. And to me, that's really good bike design, that for all of us, we can be on a bigger, more comfortable tire and still be fast.
Yeah, that was fairly close to what I had.
Sorry.
Or fairly close to what I had to say, at least to wrap it up. One thing I guess I will add is maybe what's worth discussing briefly is what is aerodynamics in a bike, and why do things like deeper wheels actually make you more aero? And to keep it brief, what it is there's two kinds of airflow. There's laminar flow, meaning smooth, and then turbulent flow, meaning ripples and waves and swirls and all that. And so which is good? Laminar is good. Laminar is smooth. You can move through it easily. There's no resistance. Turbulent, you're fighting all these currents. The currents themselves add drag on the frame and pull you backwards, pull you in all kinds of, they're doesn't like in a theoretical sense, pulls you in all kinds of crazy directions. So what are we trying to do when we're trying to make your bike more aero? We're trying to make it smooth, allow this air to stay in what's called the laminar region, stay essentially stuck to your bike as it, if you're trying to visualize it, rather than the air bouncing off your bike, swirling and go all over the place. If you visualize air as like a particle, it almost sticks to your frame, travels down your frame, and in a perfect world slips off the back with nothing slowing you down. In reality, that at some point it falls off your frame, gets turbulent, gets all crazy, and that's what's slowing you down. So that about wraps it up for me for components. If anyone's got any questions.
All right, open the floor. Anyone have any quick tech side questions for Matt?
Is there any saving the old bikes? Like, is there any saving 20 mil external rims by running 19s? Or
sorry, I should let you finish.
no, like I'm just, like we want to run 25s, and the old rims are only so wide and with the rim brakes, and so what's ideal to go if you're working with what you have?
Yeah, so that great question. What to do with what you have? So it depends. I wouldn't, so you've got this old wheel, it's 21 mil. So yeah, you obviously following the aero rule, you're going to run a 20 mil tire or narrower. You don't want to do that because it's going to ride super harsh. So in a situation like that, you're better off running a 25 or whatever your frame's going to fit and losing that aero performance because you'll actually be able to control the bike. If you've got a slightly newer, like 2010, 2015, where wheels were getting deeper, but no one had figured out this real wide aero thing yet, then you're probably good both with a 25 in terms of like comfort and safety and also for the aero.
It's also worth saying that, a lot of these much older, much narrower rims are just going to be aluminum kind of shallow box section, where the truth is you're not getting much of an aerodynamic gain anyways. And I kind of agree with Matt, is go with the tire you're going to be comfortable on. That little bit of light bulb effect on a shallow rim, is not going to kill you. The focus on some level on the tech and tire side is to say, number one, tires can be much faster and slower, like up to 20 watts or more, which is pretty huge. And number two, that if you're going to spend the money on carbon, really my corollary is, what tire size are you going to run? Then let's pick the wheel around that tire size. I think too many manufacturers are still just kind of marketing wheels as fast with what tire? And so to us, that's a big differentiator. For example, the NVAR wheel series, they launched as their all-road wheels. We've been selling them for 3 or 4 years now as road wheels set up with 28 and 30 millimeter tires. And now you're seeing the new Zip 303s basically have matched that profile and have thrown out going any narrower. So the wider trend is definitely here to stay. Okay, well, I'd say thank you, Matt. Matt's always here for wheel talk advice.
Lots of talk, always talk.
And I think we'll move on to Jesse James, who will talk a little bit about the service side of things. I think Jesse will keep it relatively brief, but we got a couple things to show you, and we'll open it up to more kind of tech and service questions. So here's Jesse. I'll let him introduce himself, and then I'll pop open the next slide.
All right. How many people we got in here today?
I don't really know.
We're at about 17 or 16.
All right.
Yeah.
Hello.
Cool.
Getting close to supper time, so we won't keep you much longer. Mike was nice enough to prepare some stuff for me here because we're so busy in the shop. And it's all pretty basic stuff at the end of the day.
I'll pop it open now, guys.
Yeah. Yes, number one. Okay, so I really like what he's done here. Clean drivetrain. So
I'll kind of touch on everything a little bit, but what I'm actually more excited to is kind of to take questions. People have had some issues with their bikes lately, or they're not sure what to do. That's kind of what I get more satisfaction out of doing, instead of kind of just talking about, you know, what kind of products we have for sale and stuff like that. So looks like number one, clean drivetrain after every ride, or after every dirty ride rather. So it's true, you know, the least you can do, and this isn't a perfect world, like we're all really busy, and especially after you finish a ride, you're usually pretty nuked and you're more worried about getting a Coca-Cola and some pretzels. You're not gonna get off the bike and then run to the brushes and the rags, you know, right away. But I'd say the number one thing that I see with bikes coming in for service in the shop is just overall the bike's really dirty. That's you know, that happens. We're really busy, like I said. But more specifically, the drivetrain, it really doesn't take much effort to kind of get it clean and then keep it going, especially if you just employ like a couple really simple things. So you're gonna want to first start off with like buying some degreaser, or you know, it'll come in a squirt bottle like this, or we have them in aerosol cans. You don't need to get a cycling specific product, but you should, and buy it from us, because you know, it keeps us in business and we're able to like buy more stuff and do cool stuff like this. So we sell a lot of the muck off products. This one specifically, it's this like nuclear green stuff. We use a ton of it, and it's probably because it's one of the only, you know, cycling maintenance products that I've ever used that really truly worked. It's got some other uses, you know, off the bike, but we're going to talk mostly about your drivetrain today. So squirt a little bit of this stuff into a rag, and then you hold that rag onto the chain and do some back pedaling. So you don't really need a fancy repair stand. You could do this crouching down on the ground, and again, maybe not right after a ride because you're going to be pretty fried, but a day after or even before a ride, it's really good to do that. A little bit goes a long way, and you'll see the results right away, unless you've really neglected it. And then in that case, you may actually need to take the chain off and bring it to a shop, or really clean it thoroughly in like a bath. You could use like an old Tupperware container. Maybe it smells like old lasagna. It's time to get rid of it. Pour some of this in there, cut it with water 50-50. We use 99% because typically a lot of the bikes are just really, really dirty, and just give that a really good shake, and you dump it out and just rinse and repeat until you get the desired effect. You'll never get every single bit of like gunk and grime off of the chain unless you go with like something, an ultrasonic cleaner, something that we started using in the shop in order to help use products like this. This is a wax product. You can't use one of these fancy wax products with like a very dirty chain. So you've really got to have a very clean drivetrain to work with in order to go with a fancy product. And even changing chain lubes, you're going to want to have a nice clean chain. But just so we don't get too far off the course, this is kind of something I do at home after a ride, is I'll just squirt some of this into a rag. I do the back pedaling, rinse and repeat. I fold that rag in on itself a few times until it's just completely covered in gunk. And then I'll grab a fresh one, apply the product to the rag, and maybe start flossing between the cassette. Each cog is as good as you can get. And that's really the bare minimum that you can do. And then that's when you're going to want to rinse this product off. So with water, if any of this stuff stays inside the rollers and the plates of the chain, any of the little products that we sell you that you're going to drip on after or before a ride are not going to mix well with this, because this is designed to dissolve this product. So you're just going to keep pouring it on. It's going to fall off, or it's just going to get really nasty. So after you use a degreaser, you're going to want to do like a 50-50 water dish soap kind of mixture to really rinse it, let it air dry, and then you'll apply your chain lube. I'm not sure what was next in the slide in terms of like the chain lube and stuff like that. There's a big debate in wet versus dry, wax versus like an oil like this. I think it's just a bunch of hocus pocus. At the end of the day, you just need to clean the chain, and whatever product you choose. So like the super secret wax stuff, the stuff that you gotta cook in a hot pot. It's all amazing product. You know, guys way smarter than me have done all the groundwork, and it truly works. But the second you stray away from the routine, it's all junk and it's just picking up garbage. So the biggest message I can get is just wipe the chain down. It's really the most important thing. And then after that, just a couple little dabs, a couple little drops. And then another big important message is after you apply a product like this is the muck off. We love muck off because it sounds like, I wouldn't say it, but it's good stuff. We get it cheap, we can sell it. It's wicked stuff. You got to wipe the excess off. I'd say the number one problem with the chains that come through the shop is the consumer is using the product and it's fantastic, but they're putting too much. And like, how much is too much? How much is too little? You really can't go wrong unless you put too much of it on, or you put it on and then you just go ride. You got to put it on and then wipe the excess off. So it's kind of a lot like you're cleaning the dirty chain. You're going to put a rag over the chain, grip it nice and tight, and you're going to backpedal. And then you're going to look at the cloth and it's going to be all dirty again. So just keep doing it until you get the desired results. But you know, you can't just drip chain lube on and then be like, yeah, I'm all lubed up, I'm ready to go. It's going to pick up so much gunk. Doesn't matter if it's a wet lube, a dry lube, NASA lube. It's just it's gonna be gross. Mike's pulling up my little spreadsheet here. Oh yeah, so low friction chain lube.
So what Jesse was just saying is all true. We just try to keep in stock a couple of good, relatively fast chain lubes. So again, to get nerdy, there used to be a website called Friction Facts that did independent chain lube testing. They got purchased by Ceramic Speed. But with a little bit of research, again, you can make some smart decisions about products that are not super expensive, that if you just use them in your basic maintenance program,
yeah,
you get some
totally. And these like, I don't mean to totally say this is all snake oil. The stuff really does work, but you've got to be pretty disciplined with it. And the second you kind of like blow it and you give up a little bit, it just kind of all goes to waste. You're actually better off just using a $6 bottle of lube than a $66 bag of wax that you need a hot plate for and stuff like that, and an ultrasonic cleaner to prep the chain properly. So you know, this stuff's great, it really does work, but you know, if you're going to go down this road, you're almost better off coming to the shop and talk a little more in detail about what's involved, because you can't just buy this and then take it home. It's like, I don't know if you guys can see this, but it's just all these little wax pellets that you're supposed to melt in, and then you drop your chain in and stuff. There's more to it.
Jesse is destroying Silka's marketing efforts right now.
Yeah.
But he's right. The truth is, we have an ultrasonic cleaner in the shop. We can get a chain completely clean. And if you were going to race a high level race, these wax chain, they work. A lot of the pro teams are riding them, but totally true.
And they've
simple, clean drivetrain with a good lube.
And I don't mean to cut you off, Mike. You know, here's a middle of the road. So it's like, you don't have to go completely with the wax beads. So like, here's a product where it's already been suspended in a carrier, and all you got to do is just drop it on. And that's great. Like, this stuff's really smart. You know, each bottle's been signed by the guy that bottled it. You know, it's cool stuff, but you can't just buy it and then put it on your chain. That's it. It's a little more to it than that. And that can almost deserve its own separate night devoted to chain maintenance and things like that. But my biggest message is like, keep it lean, keep it clean. And your shifting's going to be buttery. Your chain, you won't get the little chain tattoo thing on your thigh, on your calf. Just wipe it down. Just wipe it down, folks.
I'll also just jump in and add quickly, because I'm the guy who often hears from customers after Jesse and Matt have done their work. And, the little things like how we cable the bike and having proper cable lengths. And Jesse will shrink wrap cables to one another to kind of, again, cut down on, excess aerodynamic loss, makes a difference. But I'll say, I have up there wheel and BB service, because our mechanics do wheel and bottom bracket overhauls, but I would say way less frequently than deserved. And we see lots of expensive wheels and expensive cranksets that have not been serviced for years. And I think, you know, it's easy to look at your drivetrain and realize it's not shifting well. But again, bearings that spin smoothly are going to be fast. And the cost of like a wheel or bottom bracket service might be 40 or 50 bucks. A couple new bearings cost $15 a piece. But it's amazing to me how many people will like run wheel or crank bearings until, you know, way past their due date.
Until they're full.
Yeah. So the cable tidiness and the cable runs and things like that, that kind of has a lot to do with pretty much all that's been discussed tonight in terms of the fitting, the design of bikes and things like that. To no fault of the consumer, a lot of time you buy a bike, it comes out of the box and it was assembled somewhere, and they leave things long or they leave things rough because the assumption is that, you know, you're going to get a fitting and then that's supposed to all get cut and tidied and trimmed. The reality is, you know, most shops either don't have the replacement parts, because anytime you cut like a hydraulic hose, you got to reseal that end, and that requires a special olive and a barb, and then you got to bleed the brakes. And you know, bleeding brakes is like a difficult thing. It's not so simple. And that's very important in terms of like shifting, braking. Very tidy cable runs are probably, like, for me as a mechanic, the most important thing, because if I build a bike from start to finish and I've got very tidy cable runs, I almost never have to worry about that bike coming back for shifting issues. It's because, you know, the amount of that cable has to travel, let's say from point A to point B, it's like half compared to when you pull a bike out of a box and everything's super long and wrapped around. You got way more friction in the line. You're gonna have shifting issues, you're gonna have braking issues. So it is labor intensive. You know, you're gonna, if you come here or another shop, you know, it's not a pretty job, but at the end of it, you're left with a way nicer looking bike. And me personally, I can't get inspired to ride a bike unless I like the way it looks, you know, like same when I get my kid on, if I don't like the way I look, and if I don't like the way my bike looks, I don't really want to ride it. And you kind of figure that stuff out later down the road. But if you're having shifting issues, let's say it's like chippy or it lags between shifts, take a look at what's going on in your handlebars. Like if you got like crazy pigtails going around and everything's rattling and slapping together, imagine that was like half the length and it was all, you know, properly installed. About 99% of the issues that come through the shop are just because it's like lazily assembled, poorly assembled, either the wrong parts. And any professional bike mechanic will be able to look at that and be like, oh man, you don't need a new Dura-Ace rear derailleur, you need a nice cable run on here. Like that's what's giving you issues. So what was the cable tidiness? What did we segue into that? What was the next?
Oh, I don't know. Talk about whatever you want, Jesse. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I really want to take more questions than
yeah,
anything,
I would say
so.
we've probably covered most of it.
Okay, the bearings is a great thing though, because like typically people don't know their bearings are fried until they're clicking and creaking. Had a good discussion with the customer today about like, you know, just the way these things get worked with. Everything gets put together super fast. People don't take the time to press bearings in properly. So half the time a bearing is fried the second it gets pressed into some kind of shell, some kind of orifice, because it wasn't pressed in properly. Bearings should be inspected during any like significant service. So if you're changing chain rings or something's going on with your crank, any mechanic that pulls out all apart, he's going to stick a finger in there and roll it around. And if it's like clicking, you need a new bearing. These bearings cost $12 a piece, you know, and typically only need 2 to 4 of them in any scenario. I can't believe how much bearing service I do, especially these days. It's like, if you're having a creaky bottom bracket or whatever, you don't need a whole new bottom bracket. You need $24 in bearings. And like, that's the big message here, is it's all really basic consumables that wear out. Like these things wear out, and there's no such thing as a bearing that you'll get 60,000 kilometers, especially if it wasn't pressed in properly. It was probably damaged the second it was pressed into the shell, right? So you just need to get that stuff looked at. It's way cheaper than you think. You typically don't need a whole new collet, and a collet is the thing that we actually thread into the frame. That's the thing that you actually see. That thing's good for life. It's the guts inside of it, and it's way cheaper than people think. Again, $12 for like an ABEC 3, which is really nice. Let's say $25 for a hybrid ceramic. So like, you know, it may get a little difficult this year getting things. I'm already running low on that kind of thing, but yeah, that ties into what the guys were talking about earlier in terms of free speed and stuff like that. Like, let's make sure your bearings are okay and there's not excessive rattle or play or contamination. Contamination's a big thing. If you're riding the bike, you know, wet and then you put it away dirty, all that moisture is just sitting around your bottom bracket shell. It's sitting around your head tube bearings. Those things are going to get contaminated. Next thing you know, it's like you just bought the bike in September and you got to do all this service by the next season. It's because there's standing water, there's moisture. Its bearings need to be inspected. They don't cost a lot of money. May pay a little more in labor, but it's just such a basic thing that's so easy to fix. And it's really disappointing when you see somebody and almost every single bearing in the bike's fried. It's like a beautiful bike, but it's just like $80 in parts, and it's preventing this beautiful machine to function the way it was intended to. And yeah, I'd say come let us check your bearings out. It's really simple.
It's also, you know, worth mentioning that we live in a cold, wintry, dirty, mucky city. And for those of us who ride most of the year outside, you're just getting a lot more wear due to the snow and salt than warmer climates. So, you know, when you hear people on some online forums say like, what, your bearings wore out after only 1 year? Well, but if that 1 year is 10,000 kilometers in salt and grit, that might be all you're going to get for proper performance.
Especially that saltwater brine we use. We love using it in North America, but it's also like water is hard to keep out of a bearing. Now imagine suspending salt in that water and then blasting it into the bearing. It wrecks it right away. It doesn't matter what kind of bearing you have. It's a $400 ceramic speed bearing or a $12 ABEC 3 from Enduro. Brine just destroys it. So, you know, that's tough, man. Like, well, you can't necessarily take apart the front end of your bike after every ride for sure, but when you're doing that once a year service, that tune-up, ask the mechanic, hey, can you drop my fork? Can you check my headset bearings? I'd rather replace it now than in July or August when you don't have them and you're too busy to do it. It's the stuff's so cheap and easy to fix.
And not to mention the rare but not totally you know, we experience situations where people will let old bad bearings sit for a long time, and you can even get issues like the bearing will corrode into the frame. And we've had, you know, borderline write-offs on bicycles because someone left a headset bearing in for 10 years without changing it, and it rusted and you know, bonded to the frame, things like that.
Yeah, so like any component that fuses or cold welds is like going to be extremely difficult. But like Mike said, bearings specifically, a lot of the time they're being pressed into an opening. So there's already a really tight friction fit there. That's the whole point. So it doesn't rattle around or it doesn't come out, you know, while you're just riding. Now imagine putting, you know, some kind of expanding liquid material between those two surfaces. It's almost never going to come out. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because usually what happens is I go to knock them out and 99% of it comes out, but the most outer spot, the part that gets pressed in, that remains. And to remove that, when you've got nothing else to pull on, is probably one of the most frustrating jobs for me, but also the highest likelihood where we may get to a point where you have an awkward conversation where you're going to say, you may need a new this or a new that, because it was just a simple, you know, overlooked service interval, really.
Well, thanks, Jesse. Maybe we'll open it up to service related questions if anyone has any.
Yeah.
I have one.
I see a hand. Go for it.
Mike Henderson's there first. Go for it. He's still on mute. So I'm just wondering how things are working right now with the current situation as far as getting in for service, buying components, cleaning product. How's that working with your shop?
You take it.
So service related components, it's a little bit better than what the sales team's working with. The sales team's got almost nothing. I've got a little bit more. And sometimes you can pick and choose what gets some attention now, and that you may be able to extend the life of a component by doing a little tweak here or there, injecting some grease or oil here. You may be able to make that product last a little bit longer. But, you know, specifically things like bearings right now, it just doesn't seem like I can keep them in stock for long enough. To be fair, I don't buy enough, I feel like, while I do my orders. And that's just learning to deal with like the workload versus the service load and what we need for replacement parts. But it, you know, if you're talking about shift cables and brake cables, I got boxes of them. Bearings though, I don't, like, you know, and that's why you really want to get that stuff looked at right away. There's a big shipment coming in middle of April, which will replenish my stock. But, you know, brake pads I'm okay with. Hydraulic hose, I don't have really any of that, or some components we cannot sell you in order to keep that stuff for the bikes that we are going to sell people. So
it is a scramble of a year. Like when we tell people this part and component shortages are unprecedented, I think that does not do justice to how unprecedented and how sold out the entire world is right now. Even American manufacturers like Chris King, who make everything in-house, are like, lead times have gone from 2 weeks to 6 months.
Wow.
So my quick answer for everyone on this call is, if you need service or a new bike or a new bike part this year, get into your local bike shop tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing a couple of names on this call who would probably shed a tear with me, who have been very patient waiting for things. But yeah, the reality is it's massive shortages due to COVID, due to shipping issues, due to material supply, mixed with unforeseen demand in the cycling world. And so we're doing our best as a shop. We're pre-ordering more supply ahead of time than we ever have, but it's going to be ugly out there. We're doing our best, but it's a challenge. So that's the truth.
Yeah.
Is get started early.
For sure.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Edge.
For people who need service, how far out are you booking?
That's a good question. So right now we're in the process of expanding the service team to kind of help deal with that load. COVID-19 pandemic aside, this time of year is super busy and you can almost never have enough people no matter what. And then the scarcity of consumables and what have you certainly doesn't make it any easier. So to answer your question, I'm telling people about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks for a very serious, in-depth service job. But I'm also trying to be as liquid as possible. So it's not always like a first in, first out kind of thing. If there's something I can do quickly and efficiently, I'm motivated to get that done and out. But then there are some things that, have been in the shop for a month because I can't figure it out, or I can't get the part for it or whatever. So I'd say if you really don't need a whole lot and it's just some basic adjustments, a week to 2 weeks. If you need something and I can't get it, or it's hard to get, or you got to wait, or, you're going to be at least 2 to 3 weeks at that stage.
And that's where, Ange, we're really, because we understand most people don't want to leave a bike for a month. We're trying to grow the service team. We'll have an extra set of hands starting next week, and we might add more after that. But I really just tell people, I encourage people to book service well ahead. So, if you can live without your bike for a week in a certain period, 2 or 3 weeks from now, speak to us, book the service in for that week with Jesse, and we can try to get it turned around. But long story short is we're working to get our service turnaround times down, because we really have the same thing every year where we're, quiet in November, December, January, February gets busier. And then March and April is, a nuclear explosion. It's like every single person shows up with their bike. And, I have every day people come in and like, oh, I have a flat tire. Can you just change that for me? And I'm like, we'd love to, but we have 40 bikes next door waiting for service. So we're trying to kind of balance getting small jobs done quickly and scheduling the bigger things in so people aren't without their bikes for too long.
And just real quick, sometimes with those little jobs, like don't feel like you're maybe wasting somebody's time, because a lot of the time those little things turn into big things. So if you got something going on, something doesn't sound right or whatever, just bring it back to the shop, because like at the end of the day, it's like a safety thing, right? And that's something we want to address right away. Just because your headset's a bit loose doesn't mean I'm going to say it's going to take 2 weeks. We've got guys here that know what they're doing. If they can identify an issue, they're just going to fix it for you on the spot if they can. So if something feels weird, or you just want somebody to look at it, come by, we can look at it. But then when we start needing to repair things or replace things, that's when we're going to go through the proper channels of booking you in for a work order and getting to the, not so nice part of, the money and how long it's going to take and whatever else. So if you got a little click or creak or whatever, just ride on by, let's check it out, make sure it's not a serious thing. Potentially fix that before you need to replace it. That's the message, really.
And we do try to kind of, as Jesse's saying, give assessment, if not on the spot, same day. So yeah, for sure, we encourage people to call ahead, come by, and Matt or Jesse will usually at least assess the bike and give you a sense of how much it needs and what the time frame would be. And if it's going to take a while, we'll often kind of schedule it in or get the parts ordered and call you to come back once they're ready.
Yeah. Or there's some good YouTube videos out there. I'll, make some recommendations. You got a loose headset. You don't need a master mechanic to, loosen 2 bolts. Like that kind of thing's empowering, and you should really know how to do these like basic things. And, not to say that nobody knows how to do that, but a lot of the little things that come through, it's like basic stuff that not necessarily you should know, but you should have some knowledge of how things work, right? Because you don't want to be putting your life in the line of, not understanding how a stem works or whatever. We'll help you through it. It's all easy stuff.
And I like to say I'm a very terrible mechanic, and I totally rely on my really amazing mechanics. But yeah, like Jesse's saying, like I would not pull a crank off or rebuild a bike from scratch, but I could, change a tube on a tire, remove a stem, remove a seat post, and, replace a saddle and torque things down to proper spec. There's kind of like a basic level of maintenance that I think any cyclist can get to with just a little bit of effort.
Yeah. And hopefully, not next week, maybe not next month, but one day we will do some service seminars where we can have a small group of people and we will touch on some of the most common things. Tubeless night, crank night, creaky bearing night. We're going to get there. Obviously, our hands are tied at this point. We're also too busy, but, look forward to that from us. Fit night, I don't know. We'll work it out,
And maybe that's a good point for you guys, Brody and Ange, if you have questions that come up often from members and you want to put together kind of an info night that's a little more informative and tech centered, then we can always do something like that.
Sure. I think Danielle has a question actually. She's
Go
got
for
her
it.
hand up.
Thanks, guys. Now, it might be a little bit too late for this, but the dam is probably done. But is there anything else you can recommend for those of us that ride through the winter when you get kind of that slush and salt on your bike? And I'm thinking of my discs on my bike, and I know I'm not supposed to touch the disc brakes, but I see a bunch of salt and muck around there.
Yeah. So in a perfect world, you'd have like your B bike, which is going to get just completely abused, and you'll maybe wipe it down once in a while, but the reality is like that's the thing that you abuse. It's the tool that gets you from point A to point B in the not so nice season. But what do you do when you only have one bike and your one bike's really nice and it hurts a little bit when you see it kind of getting treated like that? I'd say the thing that you should do that almost nobody does, including myself, would be like after every single ride, roll it into the shower, blast it down, get a nice little brush like this. This is like a soft bristle brush. Get your bucket, put some Dawn dish soap in it, warm water, mix it up, and just go over the entire bike When you're using just dish soap, you can actually get that on your disc brakes. You can get it in here. It's got a drying ingredient in it, so it's going to dry quickly, but what happens when your partner comes home and there's a bunch of gross stuff in the showers, chain lube all over? Not everybody do that. You're also not going to wheel it to the side of the house or apartment with the hose in January, February, because probably water's not on anyway. So you'd have to get creative. If it was mine and I didn't have like access to a shower, I just get 2 buckets. I get just clear water in one, and then my soap and water, and I just keep rinsing and repeating till I get the desired effect. Things that you should really look at in the winter time would be like your spokes and your nipples and things like that. That liquid brine goes into the spoke threads and then goes down to the nipple. And then when you go to get your wheel trued in the spring, nothing moves because it's all seized together. So the best thing you could do that, again, nobody does, would just be to rinse it after every ride. What you could do is maybe once a week, but even then, I don't even do that, right? I have a B bike. That's why I got a B bike. But
I'd say, Danielle, also the thing that disc brakes hate is you don't want bare hands on the rotor area where the brake caliper will touch it, because any oil can contaminate a rotor, and like even the oil from your hands can create that horrible streaky squeal.
Yeah.
So if your rotors are dirty, a little bit of a water blast, some soap and water, or if you need to really go at them more aggressively, put some gloves on. But you definitely want to avoid bare hands on the rotors if you can.
To a certain degree, your rotors squeal when they get wet, even on a beautiful sunny day. So when it comes to rotors, don't even touch them. Like seriously, don't touch them unless there's something wrong with them. What you got to look out for is that moisture that gets into a place and then stays there. Disc brakes are really good in the sense that it's like I don't want to say self-cleaning, but it's self-sufficient. The pistons make adjustments as the pads wear in. Guys a lot smarter than me came up with this stuff. They did everything. It's a wicked system. Don't touch it. Like I wouldn't touch it unless it needs a brake pad replacement or something. Just blast it with water. That's all you could do, really. Because the second you touch it, pick your nose, touch your rotor, pick your ear. I don't know. You touch your rotor, it's going to squeal. So don't touch it at all. Soap, water with a brush, sure. But then if you took that same brush that you're using, you wipe the chain and then you wipe the rotor, you just fried the rotor. So don't touch the rotors, blast it with water. That's really all you can do. It'll get contaminated eventually. If it doesn't get contaminated, it's going to wear out. Disc brakes, it's a lot of hocus pocus. Just blast it with water. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Look at your spoke nipples. Look at your bottom bracket. Look at your headset bearings. Those things get destroyed in the liquid brine. It's crazy.
And I'd say, Danielle, even if you like watch World Cup cross races in the wet and the mud, it's noisy. Even a properly non-contaminated brake rotor in the winter and the wet is going to make noise. In fact, I think my daughter on the ride to school, pretty much every morning when we come down the alleyway and my brake squeals, she says, "Why, Dada?
Yeah.
Why are you making noise?" And I have to just tell her it's wintertime. They'll be quiet in the summer.
And disc brakes it's an unforgivable beast, because like we build bikes, $25,000, bike with disc brakes. It could suffer from the same issue as a $1,500 bike or a $500 brake. The second some kind of foreign material gets on that rotor and then into the brake pad, it's garbage. There's really nothing you could do to fix it. Might be able to scrape up the pad and the rotor with some sandpaper, maybe able to squeeze a little life out of it. But the second that material absorbs the contamination, it's garbage. So don't touch it at all. If you ride through an oil slick puddle on the way to work, there's not a whole lot you can do. And the amount of times where somebody buys a bike and then a week later they come back with squealy brakes, it's because there's oil all over the place, or the rear brake, they put too much chain lube. Where's my chain lube? Putting chain lube all over the place. You're riding your bike, it's flinging lube all over the place. Keep it tidy, keep it clean, wipe it down, blast your brakes with water. That's really all you can do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Got it.
Go for it.
You gotta unmute Mike.
I know the space bar is supposed to work, but Mark's talking to me about disc brakes. I've got like a few questions here. You talked about bearings. Thank you. So if we need bearings, just email at Blacksmith, and like this is the
Actually, guys, I'll give you, for those of you who are curious, give me a second. Our last slide was actually just a little thank you, and also to put up our emails. So
Oh yeah.
There's the four of us, Michael, Brian, Matt, and Jesse gets service because he's been here so long, he gets his own service email. But you can reach out to any of us directly, whether it's to book an appointment, to ask a question. We are busy these days, so apologies if you don't get an answer immediately, but we're trying to get at least within a couple days, get all emails returned.
To answer your question really quick though, bearings though, that's a tough one unless it's like a product like a DT Swiss 240 hub, one that I've been servicing for like a decade. I could tell you exactly what you need, but a lot of times I get thrown a curveball where like 3 out of the 4 bearings are the same, but then you get a funky weird size. I really need to see it. And unless you're comfortable like disassembling part of it to take pictures and then to send it to one of these emails, I'd say you're better off bringing it in.
Because there's even running changes within the same model year, the same component that we don't get told about as a shop, and they're not the previous, like the edition 1 tech paper is not on the website. So you pull apart this hub with the tech paper in front of you and you're like, what the fuck? None of these bearings are the right ones. And that happens more often than you think.
Yeah, and all bearing codes are printed very clearly on the dust seal. So we just got to wipe the dirt, the grime away, and then we're able to record those numbers. And I either have them or I don't. If this was 2 years ago, I get them in 2 days. Now it's more like 2 to 3 weeks. But you know, we'll get them for you. We'll make it roll smooth for you.
yeah, that's excellent. IS2 headset bearings, I ordered the wrong set, and it's like, why can't I? Because they want to sell you the whole thing, and like the bottom brackets on external cup bottom brackets, and you're the first person I've heard talk about actually replacing just the bearings on external cups, like BSA bottom brackets.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the products are honestly so good now. It's just, you know, I think at the end of the day, we just sometimes lose focus of the fact that some of these things are consumables. They will wear and they will break. You know, chains, cassettes, they wear, bearings, they wear, sometimes faster than you'd like. But the Solstice is that we're talking about a $12 bearing. You got a $15,000 bike, you got $5,000. You could afford the $12 bearing. You know, just don't buy coffee for everybody on the ride. Maybe just you and your buddy.
just for the shop when you
got the money,
drop your bike off.
Let's get the right parts on there. And
Mike, there are times like, you know, if it's a Shimano BSA bottom bracket,
yeah,
you know,
more standard.
It is less than $50, and
Yeah.
there are times we'll just say just replace the whole thing.
And there's some
Right.
like Shimano bottom brackets are not rebuildable. So if you're thinking, oh, last time I got my Shimano BB replaced, the shop charged me $60. What the hell? No, they did the right thing. And
Yeah,
then there's
because
like especially headset bearings are often proprietary. So if you've got a Cannondale, you've got a Giant, you should go to your dealer, get yourself a headset, get yourself a hanger, even if you don't have issues, because if those are broken, you've got a worthless bike and I can't help you.
okay. You talked about Dawn Just Soap. Thank you. I've ruined many sets of disc brake pads until I realized my automotive car wash had wax in it. So Mark, disc brakes are nightmares. My actual only question I have left is, have you guys used or experienced, did you have any input on this graphene lube wax that came out last summer? And then you guys also, I saw on your Instagram, this NFS that like I couldn't help but be interested in. I use Squirt, so I'm used to being like pretty diligent with my chains. If you have touch on those products at all.
Maybe
So some of the new stuff I haven't tried yet. I know me and Matt have experimented with some of the products like that ceramic speed stuff that came out a few years ago.
If you don't shave your legs, that's going to make you faster than using nanotech lube.
Yeah.
The theory is like, you can't argue with the theory. The theory is exceptional. Their real world application, once you get dirt into these super sciencey lubes, is different than the theory.
Although I'll say, Mike, the Squirt and the NFS are to me in the same ballpark, where you don't need that like nth degree of perfection for them to work well. Like we actually are out of it now, but that NFS lube we've sold for years under different names.
The NFS is my personal at home.
It's basically just good all-purpose lube that happens to be low friction, and we love it. And it doesn't require a whole lot of work. The graphene stuff, I don't know if we've gotten into so much yet.
No, it's $200 a bottle for a small bottle.
And it also requires like a surgically clean and dry chain and cassette, right? Like you can't just buy that product and go home and use it unless you've got some of this like industrial cleaning equipment.
Like a lot of this stuff is race product meant for race teams, but they can't make any money off of their race teams, so they have to sell it to consumers.
Yeah, they give it to the race teams and sell it to us, to me.
But we do have customers that are religious about these procedures, and it does work for them.
And that squirt stuff, Mike, is great. We don't actually sell it currently, but I've read really good things about it.
Yeah.
So I'd say when we get the NFS stuff back in, it's a good rival to the squirt for sure.
Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else?
Yeah, if I just a quick question: if you do you have a rule of thumb for how long bearings should last for someone that rides 9 months of the year, or 8 or 9 months of the year, doesn't ride through the winter, unlike Danielle? Do you, like, how many kilometers is it? 10,000, 20,000 kilometers? You should be looking to have the bearings inspected.
Good question. So that's tough because basically the manufacturer will say like it's good for this many kilometers, and then like Matt will say there's like real world conditions, and then a lot of the time the individual that's installing these components probably didn't do it properly, so then you're already kind of like handicapped in some degree. So I see a lot of bearings get pressed in sideways, it crushes or deforms it in some way, and you're only going to get like 1,000 kilometers if you're lucky. But then I'll work on a bike where a guy bought it 5 years from me, but he maintains it perfectly, and he's probably good for another few thousand kilometers, and he's actually outside of the manufacturer's, like, you're good for 8,000, he's on 18,000, there's no issues. I couldn't explain how he was able to do that, except for he took care of everything, he was on top of his maintenance. So all you could really do is take a component apart, and then you stick your finger in where that bearing is, and you just give it a little rotation. If you feel any clicking, you know, that thing's shot, because it should be buttery smooth.
It also depends how you ride. Like I'm a light guy. I downshift into the little ring in every light. So I don't wear, like, I sell my bikes before I wear out bottom brackets. Bigger riders or guys that, like, you're in the big ring when you start at the light and you're putting in tons of torque in really sloppy conditions, you're going to roast bearings way quicker than a gentler rider, more my style will.
You may see those videos of people spinning their crankset without a drivetrain fully assembled or whatever, and it just spins like 6 rotations and stuff. That's not like the pinnacle of performance, not really what you're looking for. You're looking for a bearing that when you roll it a little bit with your hand, there's some friction, but the friction you're feeling is like all the grease that they pack into that system, right? The second you load the bearing by pushing on it, and you feel a little click, even if it was like it made it 99% of the rotation with no issues, but then you feel a click at one spot, it shouldn't have it there. And that click's only going to get worse. And then a click turns into a creaking bottom bracket, or a click at every certain rotation in the crankset. So things have got to be buttery smooth. If it's not, it was pressed in bad, sorry to tell you, or it's contaminated. Contamination is probably the #1 thing that I see.
I think, Mark, though, in the end, it's a very hard answer to put a number on. It's like when you ask a helmet manufacturer how many years you get out of a helmet, none of them want to give you an answer. It's all about use and conditions. And, you know, so, I mean, I've heard from bearing manufacturers, you know, how humid or dry conditions are. You know, if you ride in places like New Mexico and Arizona, they destroy bearings because of all the grit and kind of roughness. So it's very condition dependent. I would say, you know, if you're doing a full tune-up or an overhaul once every year or so, you know, that's the time where a good mechanic will check your bottom bracket, headset, hubs, and just let you know how things are looking.
And if you want to get really nerdy about it, like we're talking $12 bearings from bike companies, you can get industrial level qualified, like certified spec bearings in the right sizes for bike components, and they are faster. But then instead of paying $12 a bearing, you're paying $100 a bearing for a steel bearing. So your 6 wheel bearings, you're now $600 in bearings. Most people aren't going to do that.
Yeah, so it's really hard to answer that question. Just like when somebody asked me like, oh, how long should the chain last? It should last 8,000 kilometers, but it's worn out at 4,500. It's going to come a lot down to the use case scenario, your environment. And so my belief is that you should at least get what the manufacturer states. So it's like, if they're selling you a bearing that's supposed to last 4,000 K, it should last you 4,000 K. But if the guy pressed it in sideways, it's junk. You know, and we're talking about $12, $25 bearing. Like we can take care of these costs. It's the cost to ride. It's the cost to have nice stuff.
It sounds though, Mark, like if you're not riding midwinter and keeping your bike pretty clean, you should, you know, probably 5,000 K at a minimum. 10, you know, I think that 10,000 K mark and above is where we want to at least inspect things.
Yeah.
If you're wearing a bearing often, that can be a sign there's an issue. Like if you have a carbon frame with a press fit bottom bracket and you're not a harsh rider and you go through 2 BBs a season, there's a very good chance your frame's out of tolerance and just nobody's thought to tell you that, or nobody's thought to check.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. It goes under the poor installation, poor manufacturing. So it's such a tough one to answer, really.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right. Any more questions, anyone? Or I think we're coming to the end of this, I think, Mike and Blacksmith team.
A final question.
Go ahead.
If I put a bar bag on my bike, how many watts is it going to cost me?
We're all laughing, but the answer is a ton. An aero bike with aero wheels, every single upgrade I could do, and then I put a bar bag on, negates every single upgrade I've just done.
But Will, it's so hipster of you, so you should do it anyway.
Well, I know.
The answer is Brian rides his road bike with a burrito bag in the front. We actually sell a lot of them, and it's become, you know, much more commonplace to have bags on bikes, and the whole gravel adventure trend has really taken off.
Well, because none of us are riding fast enough for aero to matter.
It's all about happy watts.
Yeah.
Style points over watts. Come on.
I would say though, Will, it's funny that often when someone has one bag, it's always that front bag, and it's accessible. But in terms of intelligent aerodynamic design, you're probably better off with a frame bag that fills in your triangle above your water bottles. But that doesn't look as cool, so people want the burrito bag. But yeah, it's really terrible for aerodynamics.
Making me feel a lot better.
So if you're feeling slow on your gravel rides, it's all the bag. It's not you.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Guys, maybe before we close up, just talk to everyone about policy on like stopping by the shop, booking appointments, coming in for services or fits or things in store during kind of what's going on right now. Just kind of let people know how that process might look.
Sure. Obviously we're kind of following provincial guidelines as they change, but for the most part, we've tried to just be by appointment during this whole COVID time. We don't turn people away at the door if they don't have appointments, as long as the store has capacity, but we just encourage people to book times ahead, especially these days, just to eliminate too many people in the shop at once. The nice thing is we've got a separate fit area. So we've got enough room here to kind of move people around and keep folks separate. But essentially service, we do now have an online booking system for service consults, for bike fitting, and even for sales consults. So we encourage people to use those. You can call ahead, but really, Brody, the answer is like, if we've got capacity, we want you in the store. So if you're riding by and you have a question, buzz on up, we'll let you in.
Awesome.
We pretty much don't turn anyone away. Occasionally we've had people just kind of wait in the hall, or we'll put people next door if there's too many people in the shop. But yeah, we're kind of a self-imposed family bubble, which is why we're maskless now. But all day long when customers in the shop, we're masked up, we're cleaning surfaces between fits and just trying to be safe. Especially now that the spring's here, we're keeping the windows open all day. And, fortunately we're small enough that we usually don't have more than a few people in the shop, even when we're busy.
And I'd say, the number one thing too is just be patient. you know, we're trying our best. We're a small team, so sometimes the phone might not get picked up the moment you call, or maybe your email doesn't get answered right away. But kind of dealing with a really big influx of new riders and a great traction for the shop. So, you know, if you could just try to be a little understanding, not accusing anybody of anything, but I just noticed it's just very busy, very, very busy, and we're just trying our best. So just trying to make it in this crazy scenario
Crazy
that
world.
we're in right now.
But I'd also say, you know, be patient, but also we're here to help.
Yeah.
And don't feel bad about picking up the phone or sending a message.
This
or-
is the year to use us as a resource to become more self-sufficient. This is the only year you're going to walk into a bike shop and I'm going to tell you to buy a cassette off Amazon.
we're hoping it gets better, and it's kind of ebbs and flows. Like I think we got 25 Di2 batteries in about a month ago, which, believe me, I don't like spending $3,000 on batteries, but we know if we don't buy them now, they're not going to be available. So we're trying to stay ahead of the curve as much as we can, and yeah, just hoping that people understand it's a tough time, and you know, we're doing our best. But generally the shop is functioning at a pretty normal capacity. We're just having to hustle a little harder to find certain parts, or you know, small delays. Like we've had a few situations where bikes that usually get built in a day or two take a week or two because we might be waiting for a free hub body or a headset a lot longer than we'd like. But generally we're an industrious crew, and we're still getting people on the road.
Worth the wait.
Thanks, Ann.
Thank you.
Well, I may be coming over for a saddle, so because I have problems and I feel like there's a solution there. So
I should say it's always worth asking, because the shortages have not been consistent, and like things like we have certain components that we have tons of, like handlebars, saddles. It seems like for whatever reason production hasn't really slowed down, whereas group sets have been terribly problematic. So getting people on the road on new bikes or even replacing cassettes and chains is challenging.
Get a bike fitting. That's all of that, man.
But yes, Brian is always here for bike fits, so
Yes.
that's easy. But yeah, we're still pretty sufficient. Like I feel bad for bike shops that are just relying on the big brands like Trek and Specialized, where if they don't get their orders, they just don't get their orders. Where we're used to dealing with 1,000 different small suppliers to put our bikes together. So it does mean we have a lot more options to.
Things are so bad, other shops are asking us for parts because we have more Shimano Di2 batteries than Shimano's going to get this year.
Wow.
I did ship a Di2 battery to a dealer in Collingwood today. That's not making that. Yeah, it's also honestly a time, hopefully, that shops will be friendly and good neighbors. And, you know, when I hear there's a shop that needs something, I try to supply it, because hopefully we'll need that favor back at some point.
awesome. Any last questions, or I think we're probably past everyone's dinner time at this point. So I'd like to say thanks, Blacksmith and the team there, for taking the time to stay with us. I know I'm going to go look at my bike and look at a few parts and go, maybe I should consider some upgrades right now. So like maybe small, more narrow bars. I'm like, yeah, mine are pretty wide. But yeah, so everyone give them a call, stop by. But thanks again, Blacksmith, and hopefully we can plan a session when we can all gather properly and get some time with you guys face to face.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Group riding future for all of us.
Absolutely. I guess I'll leave it there, and I'll just let everyone kind of sign off and say thanks, and hope to see you guys soon.
Thanks, guys. We're definitely proud to be affiliated with you. You're a great club, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Have a great night. Great long weekend.
Thanks, and thanks everyone for coming. Bye.
Cheers.